Well, we are in the midst of a series of messages where we have been looking for light in the dark places of life. And we've talked about disease, we've talked about tragedies, and today we're going to talk about a very dark place, the dark place of depression. When I was a sophomore in college, we had an 8 o'clock microbiology class. And college students, if you have to take microbiology, avoid microbiology at 8 a.m. To Pseudomonas and Streptococcus and E. coli is not a good thing at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had an 8 o'clock microbiology class, and there was a guy that sat in front of me, and his name was Joe. And I had gotten to know Joe because I was good friends with several of his roommates, and so we had become friends as well. One Tuesday morning, Joe wasn't in class, and neither were his roommates. And this was unusual because they were very studious students who never missed class. Come to find out that his roommates had woken up that morning and they had found Joe asleep in the chair in their living room. Unable to wake him up, they found empty prescription bottles next to the chair. Joe had attempted suicide. This was the first time at about the age of 20 or so that I had been exposed to mental illness, to depression, and someone wanting to kill themselves. It was, to say the least, a huge shock. I remember in the days afterwards that I felt that I needed to go to the hospital and see Joe. And I will tell you, it felt very awkward. Not quite sure, what do you say to someone who just tried to kill themselves? But I knew that he needed to know that he had friends and that he wasn't alone. He did not have a sign on his head that said depressed. There was nothing about this guy that would say to me or anyone else that he was in a very dark place. But here was a friend of mine who was going through a very, very dark time, and I was clueless. And I will tell you, there are days when I'm blue, down, have difficulty being motivated, struggle, making decisions, that I have never felt the deep darkness that really comes with true depression. Depression as a disease is not just depressed mood. It's a lack of interest in the things that you would normally find interesting. It's a fatigue. It's an illogical sense of worthlessness, of feeling alone, guilt. It's a disruption in sleep, maybe too much sleep, too little sleep, a disruption in appetite, and most importantly, there are recurring thoughts of suicide. And it's not one of these things alone, but it's many of these things together, usually over a sustained period of time. I think the clinical diagnostics talk about at least 2 weeks of sustained multi-symptoms. But depression is a real thing, and it will, in fact, have a major impact on our lives. It can, in its most severe form, it is debilitating and will impact work and home. Even in its mildest forms, it can impact our lives and severely compromise your quality of life. While there are many treatments for depression, medications alone may only be of moderate success, particularly for those with major depression. Most people will require counseling from professional, well-trained professionals, and that is essential to treatment. And for those of you who don't know, my day job is over in the College of Pharmacy at Purdue, and for about the last 20 years I have studied neuropharmacology, and particularly areas of the brain that play into depression. And I will tell you, this is a complex disease. There are genetic factors, there are other health issues that can be at play, but there are neurochemical changes that occur in depression, and it is a real disease. It affects nearly 1 in 4 Americans over the course of their lifetime. Women are more likely than men to experience depression. At any given time, about 15% of Americans are taking antidepressant drugs. It's pretty interesting that of all the drugs on the market for all the diseases that are out there year in and year out, 2 of the top 10 medications tend to be antidepressant drugs as the most prescribed agents. to our population. This is a global problem. The World Health Organization has named depression the second leading cause of disability, second only to cardiovascular disease. Bring it a little closer to home in a place like Purdue. 44% of college students report symptoms of depression. That's almost half of our college students reporting symptoms of depression. 1 out of every 4 college students suffers from some diagnosable form of mental illness. And as I discovered as a sophomore in college, depression can try to rob you of your life. Nearly 20% of young people contemplate or attempt suicide every year. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among people ages 15 to 24, and it's the second leading cause of death in college students ages 20 to 24. Teens diagnosed with depression are 5 times more likely to try to kill themselves than adults. And here's where the big problem lies. Over 2/3 of young people struggling in the darkness of depression do not talk about it and do not seek help. They try, like many adults, to go it alone. It is severe. It has a biological, medical basis. There are many, including many Christians, who will say that depression is not a disease, that it is a weakness of character, that people just need to buck themselves up and get through it. To me, that is horribly irresponsible. When left untreated, the consequences of depression can be dire. And this is a disease that the numbers tell us are affecting so many of us. And if you aren't struggling with depression, you have family members and friends who are. On a given Sunday, we have almost over 400 people in this place. Looking at the numbers, that means in our church family, over their lifetime, 80 to 100 of us are going to struggle with depression. On any given Sunday, 60 of us are probably taking antidepressant drugs. And that may be on the low side. This is a real problem, and it is important that we talk about it in church because we believe there should be a Christian response as we try to find the light in what many call the sustained darkness of depression. So why do we want to talk about it in church? Well, for me, to only look at it from the biological or medical aspects really neglects us as spiritual beings. Even many neuroscientists, psychologists, and psychiatrists would agree that we need to go deeper than just treating people at the biological or the medical. Going back to the 1500s, many people within the church began to recognize depression. They called it melancholia, being melancholy. And they recognized that there was a link between the physical and the spirit. So does the Bible talk about depression? Well, that's a tough one. We don't have clinical diagnoses of Bible characters. But if we look at many of the characters, particularly in the Psalms, if we look at David in the Psalms, we see time after time where he is crying out in anguish. Psalm 31, verses 9 and 10, we hear David say this: "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye wastes away from grief, my soul and body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing, and strength fails me because of my misery, and my bones waste away." Was David depressed? We won't know, at least in this life. Maybe one day we can ask him. But it is clear that he is crying out to God in anguish from a very dark place. Another character in the Bible that to me very much speaks to depression is the character of Elijah. Now you need to know a little bit of the backstory of Elijah. Elijah was one of the great prophets of God. And he lived in a day where the King Ahab, served a different god, the god Baal. And the king had arranged a big showdown between the prophets of Baal and Elijah and his God, our God, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. Short story is, in the big showdown on the mountain, Elijah struck down all the prophets of Baal. This did not sit well with the king or his wife. And so we pick up their story in 1 Kings chapter 19. King Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." The message to Elijah is, I'm coming for you, and I'm going to do to you what you did to our guys. Then Elijah, was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. Now begin to hear Elijah's anguish. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. God, strike me down. Let me die. I'm worthless in serving you." Then Elijah lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Now, that would just be shocking to me. If I wake up this morning and found, well, unless somebody got up and cooked me breakfast, which didn't happen, I will hear about that later. But he looked, and there at his head, he saw the food. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat. Otherwise, the journey will be too much for you." This story to me captures what our Christian response to depression should be. We hear the voice of the angel saying, "Eat, drink, take care of yourself." And then those words, "Otherwise, the journey will be too much to handle." The journey for depression is too much for many to handle, particularly if they try to go it alone. The question is, if you're struggling with depression or you have friends or family members who are struggling, the question for us is, will we go it alone or will we go it with God? Will we go it alone or will we go it with God? Of all the people, those who are suffering from depression, they're already feeling lonely and alone. It's part of their disease, part of the depression. As followers of Jesus, we should be in a position that no one that we know or love has to make that journey alone. So when it comes to depression, what does it mean for you and me? For someone to go it with God and not to go it alone? Well, first, I think going it with God means taking care of your physical needs. That's what the angel was saying. Eat, drink, take care of yourself physically. And certainly seeking proper medical treatment would be part of taking care of our physical needs. Part of treatment, though, would be proper nutrition, proper rest, proper exercise. So the words of the angel ring true. In trying to find the light to overcome depression, you must take care of the physical needs, or the journey will be too much. Now, we know that tackling depression just from the spiritual side of things alone will not bring a cure. I would not suggest that. In fact, if you or someone you know is suffering from depression, my plea is, before the end of the day tomorrow, that you seek help. Take care of the physical needs. Don't try to go it alone. The journey will be too much. And of all the things I'm going to say, this is the most serious. If you have been having thoughts of suicide, do not let the sun go down today before you seek help. Call a hotline. Call a family or a friend who you know loves you and trusts you, and begin the healing process. Don't go it alone any further. Don't. The emotional struggles of depression have tremendous implications on our lives, and we ought to avail ourselves of therapies, support groups, medications when we need them. There is no shame in seeking help and helping others find help when they need it. Going it with God also means to be on a journey with God's people. That's you and me, the church. That means we need to bear with one another. It means we need to overcome our fears and our uncomfortableness when it comes to talking about mental illness and depression. I tell you, I remember still how awkward it felt going into that hospital room to see Joe, not knowing, well, am I going to know what to say? They just need someone there for them. We need to overcome our uncomfortableness, any stigma that we have around mental illness, so that we can support each other openly and lovingly. We can show people the light. We can help be the light on their path. Going it with God means going it with Christ. It means we need to be, and you need to be, in a personal relationship with Christ. It means you need to invest, and you will not feel like it if you're depressed, but you need to invest in your spiritual life. You need to lean into prayer life. You need to lean into Bible study. And you need to be here for worship on Sunday mornings. You need to get close to God every chance you can. Eugene Peterson is a Christian author. He authored the contemporary translation of the Bible known as The Message. Many of you may know that. And he's quoted as saying the following: "All the persons of faith I know are sinners, doubters, uneven performers. Neither our feelings of depression, nor the facts of suffering, nor the possibilities of defection are evidence that God has abandoned you, us or you. And I'm here to tell you that God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit will not abandon you in your dark time." So can going it with God make a difference, or a big difference? As we wrap up, I want us to contrast two of Jesus' disciples, Judas and Peter. If you're not a church person, I suspect you know who Judas is. All right? Judas is the guy that betrayed Jesus and sent him to his death. Judas, as the book of Matthew tells us, was overcome with grief. And he went and he hanged himself. Judas chose to go it alone. Peter was one of the faithful as well. In the hours after the crucifixion, Peter found himself denying that he even knew Christ. Didn't want to be associated with Christ. Not just once, but 3 times, we're told. He denied his association with Christ. He was so overcome with guilt, he also fled. But what we know about Peter is, and if we take all 4 of the Gospels together, we see that somewhere between Christ's death and the 3rd day, Peter had found himself back with the other disciples. He had found comfort in the other followers of Christ. Peter chose to go it with God. Peter chose to hang on despite his grief. And did it make a difference? I think it made all the difference in the world, because 3 days later, Peter experienced the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Judas had chosen to go with God? If Judas had chosen just to hang on, to seek forgiveness, to hang on just for 3 days, Judas would have come face to face with the resurrected Christ, and Judas would have heard these words: "My brother, I forgive you." Hanging on, going it with God, makes all the difference in the world. The journey with depression can be too much to handle, especially if we try to go it alone. If we as the church are to be God's hospital, then we need to take serious the business of being a place of healing. We must be Christ so that no one has to make that journey alone. The words of the angel speak right to today. And these words apply pretty much regardless of what dark time you may be going through. Today's topic has been depression. You may be in a dark time in a relationship, at school, at work. The words of the angel hold true. Go it with God. Hang on. The journey does not have to be too much, regardless of what you're going through. If we take care of our physical needs, we seek the support of our family and our friends, and we let the light of Christ be our guide. Pretty regularly here in Wired, we turn to pop culture to help us understand our faith in sort of everyday terms. We'll look at movie clips, or we'll look at pop songs, or see music videos. We just have found that the arts of our culture can help bring our faith to everyday life. And this happened to me this week. There's a song by the great prophet Avril Lavigne. The song is called Keep Holding On. And I'm telling you, this song got in my head, and we're going to watch the video. And as we do, I hope that you'll enter just a private time of prayer, that you will hear these words as I heard them. The words, if I could imagine the angel coming down to Elijah today, or coming down to you in your dark place today, these are the words that I hear the angel singing. Take heart, hang on, you can make the journey with God. That God will see you through the darkness.